Good morning. So before I jump into this, becomes my quick check on audience knowledge about blockchain. How many people here have a crypto wallet? Ooh, the number's growing. Interesting. Okay. How many people own Bitcoin? And does anyone own Bitcoin in this room before 2017? Okay, excellent. All right, we've got some early people. Good. And this is just, what's interesting is I've been talking about blockchain now for a couple years, and it's interesting to me to see the number of hands today. Actually, I think ranks on a percentage for a non-blockchain event is about the highest I've seen. So that's very interesting. The fact that there's people who do not yet have a crypto wallet, if you're here in this room and you're learning about this, my recommendation first and foremost is you should go through the process and you should buy a bit of some cryptocurrency just to understand what this is about. And you'll see actually how hard it is and how far we are from this being a truly simple and ubiquitous technology to use. But still, if you want to learn about this, being part of this is really the best place to start. For the fact that there are people here who don't know anything, I'm going to start off from basics here. What is blockchain? And I'm going to talk about the public blockchains, there's private blockchains, and there's all sorts of derivatives. For those of you who don't know, this week is actually Blockchain Week in New York. New York's making a big push to try to be a blockchain center. There's a massive conference going on uptown called Consensus, where I was there last year. There were about 2,000 people. This year, there's over 8,000 people there, most of them paying an outrageous sum. It's like the thing is growing as an area massively. And I really think this is great that Media Post is bringing us attention to this industry, because we're seeing the repercussions washing through from some of the biggest order problems around financial services and currency, but to touch every part of the business. And ultimately what it comes down to is the blockchain has these key things, right? It's an infrastructure. Blockchain is not a finished piece of nice consumer technology. It is a piece of infrastructure on which things are built. And it's the idea about it being decentralized, self-owned, and controlled public ledger of transactions. It is a seriously unglamorous thing, but it's very fundamental. The core idea is that anyone has access to it, to the entire blockchain, if it's a public blockchain. And within that, it's secured using cryptography, i.e., it's not something you can go and hack and change. And by distributing it on a global basis, by having no one single copy of it, as is the case with most databases, instead of having one set of servers, one set of database, you have multiple copies stored with as many nodes as there are in the network. And that makes it very difficult to tamper, copy, or destroy. And it gets rid of the idea of having an intermediary. And I'll talk more about this. And ultimately, that drives down transaction costs. And I'll give you some very specific examples about how that happens to work. At the heart of it, though, you got to think about, where did blockchain really come from? There's a guy named Nick Szabo who in 1998 actually wrote a paper talking about the God protocol. And really, since the early days of the internet, people have been thinking about how do you create trust in an environment where there's no way to really know who you're dealing with, who you're interacting, what machine you're interacting with. This problem was sticking around, so Nick Szabo wrote a paper in 1998 talking about the God protocol. What if you could have a protocol which made it possible to know everything at once, so you didn't have to worry about the notion of trust? Well, when Satoshi Nakamoto, whomever that is, published this paper about the idea of the Bitcoin protocol, it was then essentially when folks like Mark Andreessen saw this, is like, wow, this is it. The heart of this is about trust. This isn't about currency, this isn't about money, it's about how do you establish trust. And that really, I think, is the heart of what blockchain is about. At the most fundamental level, it is about allowing trusted transactions between two or more people that can happen anywhere, anytime. And it's authenticated by the fact that people are collaborating on a massive scale. And it's powered by all those people's own self-interests. The trust is a factor because everyone is acting out of their own self-interests and not by any one person's self-interest in the system. I think this is really fundamental to how we see this stuff, how it can play out. But at the scale, if you think about, if you get incentives right with this, how it can work. So it was just 2009 when this white paper was published. And without anyone asking anyone to do anything, something pretty miraculous happened. The world's largest supercomputer has been built. No one asked anyone to do anything. But by reading this paper and by starting to act and starting to organize, people have built the world's largest supercomputer, which if you add up all the computing function of all the computers currently mining Bitcoin, it is the largest supercomputer at least by 4 times, maybe even greater now. The number grows on a crazy rate every day. And with that, I actually didn't update today's valuation, but it's in around around $200 billion in terms of market value has been created out of people acting out of collective self-interest in this trust-based protocol environment. And you think about really how this has been built up. And we're not having a discussion about Bitcoin specifically today, but it's important to understand what Bitcoin has proven and how blockchain can be used more widely. And when it first launched, so there was the Genesis block, the first Bitcoin, nothing happened. 2009, okay, nothing happened on the blockchain for a while. But almost 1 year later, finally, someone's priced it. The first Bitcoin, then you could price 1/16 of a cent. It was a good time to buy Bitcoin. But what's really interesting, if you think about what Bitcoin is at the heart of it, is if you take all the properties of money, if you go through, talk to any monetary specialist, they'll tell you these are the key things. It has to be fungible, durable, portable. It has to have a very high value ratio to weight. Obviously in this, it's like nearly infinite, it's pretty good. It has to be uniform, infinitely divisible, accessible, and scarce. Those things are all possible. That's at the heart of Bitcoin. But there's one thing which makes it special and distinctive to just being money, and that's what makes this very powerful, is that it has the settlement layer built in. This is the trust factor, and this is what makes Bitcoin such a powerful idea, because suddenly you no longer need third parties through which to transact. You no longer need a trusted bank in which to have an interchange of funds. And this concept, that simple idea that you can embody trust, you can embody a settlement layer within a currency itself, is really what the revolution of this all starts with. But at the same time, don't underestimate how long it takes to change people's behavior. These are cowrie shells. Who here knows the last time cowrie shells could be used as currency? Who wants to guess? I have a special prize if you can get this right. They are, in fact, still in use in 2 countries, including in Papua New Guinea, 2 islands, the Cook Islands. You can still use cowrie shells. They've been used as currency for 30,000 years. So the fact that Bitcoin hasn't suddenly overwhelmed the world as the standard currency, not a surprise. In fact, we are extremely slow to change as human beings. And where we are in terms of the adoption curve is also sort of sobering. If you think about now where we were in terms of internet growth, internet adoption, we're somewhere around 96, 97. They're in around 20, 30, 40 million internet users globally. It's kind of crazy to think how small the numbers were then. And in the dot-com peak here, there's around 250 million people, the sort of peak time of dot-com bubble time then. Well, if we look at how many people have a crypto wallet, so just the end of last year, we're at about 22 million crypto wallets. Now, it's very hard to get precise numbers, so I do my best for trying to cobble together from sources, but I would say somewhere 25 million, maybe more. Lots of people have multiple wallets, hard to get exact numbers, but maybe it's 30 million, maybe 40 million. We're somewhere very early if we think about crypto wallets relative to adoption here, right? So there's super early days in this. And meanwhile, look at how the internet's grown, though. We're now at a place where 3.5 billion people have access to the internet. At the same time, there is massive amounts of capital coming into this space. It's really, really crazy. So just in terms of to understand, so if we go back, there was all of $2 million went into VC investment in the blockchain space, $2 million. That's grown to now, this year so far, already $400 million in VC investment's gone in. Last year, it was a total about $680 million. But the thing which has really changed the game is the idea of the ICO. Something that had just started really just 3 years ago has now taken over. And already this year, even though people have talked about, oh, the ICO hype, blah, 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 is it over? Well, in fact, we've more than doubled already the amount of money raised through ICOs just to last year. This is a mechanism that's taking off. And if you look at how the tracking price of Ethereum goes against how money is raised, you see that there's clearly a correlation of sorts here. It's not a super strong one, but there's still a correlation. More capital coming in is driving up overall prices of cryptocurrencies and the like, more money is coming into the ecosystem. The ecosystem is moving along, it is moving forward. Now, we could have a long discussion just about ICOs. I'm not going to talk about the legal part of them today. That's a massive discussion. But the fact is this mechanism is working. And part of the interesting thing with ICOs, specifically, as more people come in to a marketplace, more value it is. If you're not familiar with this concept, there's actually this idea of Metcalfe's law. It was actually developed in looking at the value of networks, looking at the phone system. Good old, plain old telephone system, the POTS networks. Metcalfe realized that the value of telephone network increases every time you have another person on the network. More people can call each other, right? So when you just have two people, not very much value. But as the value of that network grows, so it grows, and it grows in an exponential way. And that's where we are now. We're an early part of the adoption curve, still in the whole world of blockchain. Small number of users, so early part of exponential growth curve, but that is the kind of curve we're growing. But an ICO has specifically been developed as a tool that really helps break the challenge of how do you accelerate adoption? How do you push yourself up that exponential curve? And at the heart of it, the heart of the idea of an ICO is how do you get more people into an ecosystem faster? How do you get them in an early part and allow people who are participating in the early part of the thing to gain more financial benefit, even while there's still relatively low practical benefit? So if you think about how do I provide incentives if I was setting up a telephone network and I run an ICO, I'd say, great, hey, everyone, I'm going to sell you tokens to get on this telephone network. But to start with, yes, there's only 2 telephone lines. Okay, low value. But you're going to accrue some more value. The more people have telephones, the more your value of your tokens to be buying time on the telephones are going to go up. As you can imagine, over time, telephone network gets built up. Suddenly, the last person coming into using a telephone, if they were getting a token, then the network's already been created. The people who bought in early would have a lot more value than have to show up. That's really the heart of the idea of why this ICO model is being adopted and being used, because for everything about blockchain, it requires large networks of people to really make it work. It requires lots of machines doing work, lots of people contributing assets, lots of people being part of it all. So an ICO is the thing where you get around the adoption curve around how do I get people on my network? How do I create the right incentives to do that? And it makes it such an interesting model. Similarly, it's bringing in an entirely new pool of capital, because people who have otherwise had to go through the siloed processes of being an approved investor, being a limited partner to invest in a VC fund or a hedge fund or a private equity fund, that was really quite a closed system. Suddenly, anyone who has capital can deploy it through an ICO. And so it really changes the nature of how you can get capital. Now, specifically, when someone does an ICO, my last point on this, there's just at a high level, there's 3 kinds of things that people are selling when they do an ICO. Cryptocurrency is the most common we understand. You can be buying a security, i.e. a share of the enterprise. The final thing is you can be buying a utility token, and that is to be buying the right to be using the particular blockchain system for a benefit. And I'll talk more about some of those things, some of the kinds of utilities that people are creating now. But where are we in the evolution? Right now, we're on a, I would look at it as sort of, we're now in blockchain 3.0, and let me explain to where we are. And earlier, Steve was saying, we kind of started off at a point where this is not a continuum, this is not separate to the growth of the internet, this is really just another stage in the development of the internet. I would really state the internet development as stage 1 of blockchain. Mobile as being the second phase, because really mobile has been key for broad-based adoption of this technology, of the internet technology. The first phase of blockchain was the introduction of the idea of cryptocurrency. We talked about that. All the facets of money plus a settlement layer creates cryptocurrency. Blockchain 2.0 had another important innovation, and this was the launch of Ethereum, was the idea of the smart contract. That I could write an app that when certain rules are followed, certain things happened, immediately the contract is settled and monies or whatever can be exchanged. That idea about being able to program in rules and have that thing was the next big evolution, and Ethereum has powered then a whole new layer of ecosystem on top. And I think we're in what I call blockchain 3.0. If you go to Consensus, if you go look around the floor there, if you go to any conference now, you see there's another layer of companies which are creating a whole new set of tools that are sitting on top of the blockchain. They're starting to get to the same place now where, if you think about what the App Store did for Apple and the iPhone, I think we're really getting to the point where that is almost where we are. That people are creating tools that all of us who want to leverage blockchain don't need to worry about the blockchain. For most of us, we want to build applications using this. And people are now getting the tool sets ready to go, so that becomes much more possible. Just to give you some examples then of how this stuff is getting applied, though, not in our direct industries, but also how it pulls apart silos. And this, I think, is a good example of trying to show how blockchain attacks the current business models by trying to create very horizontal things. So Amazon, for example, has a very powerful set of web service businesses. Amazon is leveraging its global scale to be able to target certain pieces of web infrastructure, so networking, computing, storage, database stuff. You can buy all of those things from Amazon as a web service. What's interesting is each of these companies, and these are just examples, there's many others each in these areas, but for example, Filecoin is a company which has said, all right, I'm gonna issue a token, I'm gonna create a network of people saying, if you buy into the Filecoin network, you as a user can give up some space on your machine. Everyone has some spare capacity, and you can participate in the token economy here by giving up a little bit of your Filecoin space, a little bit of your computer space. In exchange for tokens, you get paid for the network using it. The marginal cost for someone to participate in the Filecoin network is essentially zero. A little bit of cost of electricity, right? They don't have to buy storage equipment, they don't have to do anything. But suddenly they're participating in this economy with this marginal equipment. This, I think, is one of the most powerful ideas about how you can see blockchain getting used. It allows someone to securely set up and just use assets in a completely different way, underused assets or unused assets as such. Each of these models are taking the same problem in different parts using these assets. But this is, again, a common business model we're starting to see. But you're also seeing that blockchain can solve very different problems. And I put up the example of lettuce. And how does blockchain and lettuce come together? Which is a curious question. And it's interesting. I recently had a chance to meet a fellow from Walmart who's responsible for the food supply chain. Now, how many of us here heard about the E. coli romaine lettuce? How many people here threw out their romaine lettuce? Right. We had to throw out our romaine lettuce because the problem was there's a lack of data. There's a lack of data about lettuce. Actually, it turns out that there was only 54 boxes of infected romaine lettuce that all came from a place in Yuma, Arizona. But the problem is that no one knows where those boxes of romaine lettuce went. And as a result, we had to throw everything out. In fact, according to the FDA, anyone in the food supply chain only has to keep data one step back and one step forward. This food supply chain is anything but a supply chain. It's a supply maze. And things move around. Now, interestingly, IBM and Walmart have worked together to deploy blockchain as a way to keep track of all the information on the blockchain. So it makes it very simple for suppliers, transport companies, retailers to keep track of that. Before they supplied it, Walmart, the head of Walmart's food supply chain, told us that he was talking about how he had asked his team, okay, trace this bag of mangoes he had on his table back. Took his team working full tilt, nearly 7 days to figure out where these mangoes had come from, a little farm in Mexico. Deployed it on blockchain, when they could actually open it up, allow suppliers, everyone in the ecosystem to actually be able to exchange data as they wanted in a secure but transparent way. Total time elapsed when they rerun the experiment. How long? 2.2 seconds. It's that kind of radical transparency and the ability to communicate information between parties in a clear and trusted way, again, becomes the ways where this is powerful. So you think, how much food waste? In fact, over 1/3 of food produced in the US is thrown away. Think of all the romaine lettuce we all collectively wasted simply because we could not verify the origin of the romaine lettuce and know whether it was safe or not. And only 54 boxes, a couple of, whatever that is, I don't know how many heads of lettuce are in a box, but that's, a few hundred heads of romaine lettuce caused massive destruction, massive waste. And this sort of thing goes on and on. Think about how often we have to throw away things because we don't understand its origin, we don't understand its provenance, we don't understand what's happened to it along the way. This is really the places where we start to see blockchain becomes powerful. And this is becoming mainstream. Just on Monday, this was announced, it seems so simple, but yet a shipment of soybeans was transacted on the blockchain. And HSBC financed $10 million worth of soybeans. But what's news here is in order to do a finance, a letter of credit normally takes 5 to 10 days. But by putting this information onto a blockchain, being able to manage it, the process came down to a process of 24 hours. Why? It's about all the parties involved here were linked. The data can move in a transparent, instantaneous, and immutable manner. And that really starts to show you how things can change. So what does this have for us in our industries around marketing, media, consumer insights? Let me spend a few minutes now just digging a little bit more specifically to where I think there's some of the biggest challenges. Now, as the advantage of someone now, I'm sitting in responsible for data assets on the world's 4th largest market research company. I'm very concerned about quality of data and insights, and also the potential of it. Like, I look forward and I think there's so many possibilities, in particular with AI, but the possibility to unlock insights to accelerate our ability to execute on things. But for an AI system to work well, for a good analysis to happen, you need 4 key things for data. One, you need volume of data. You need that data to be able to move as fast as it's able to move, depending on the kind of data it is. You're going to need different kinds of data to inform models. But the fundamental thing is also veracity. I need to know where that data came from, what happened to the data along the way, how it's been changed. If I don't understand that, I have a lot of problems. And we can see this if we think about what was the biggest crisis we faced in our recent history was a crisis of confidence in data. Why did the subprime mortgage crisis happen? I would argue that, in fact, we in our industry are facing potentially the same crisis of lack of confidence in data. Subprime mortgage, very simply for all of you, we all live through this, but if we boil it down, what really happened, we took these mortgages, they were getting rolled up into packages and sold. That was fine, that wasn't a problem. People understood there was a mixed bag. Some were A grade, some were D grade mortgages. As a bundle, people were buying and selling them with that knowledge. But what happened was, as these packages got rolled up further and further, there was the underlying values never were repriced. People ultimately could not reprice these assets. So when they bought the packages of these assets, they no longer had a link back to the underlying value. And when there was a realization that they could not price these assets accurately, they did not have trust in the prices of the assets, liquidity froze up, and we had this massive crash. I think we're actually seeing this now in our market. It's just a little bit slower moving and a little bit quieter to see. But the lack of data velocity and veracity is hurting market research, media buying. It's hurting because clients are changing their behaviors because they know this is happening, and implicitly they're changing their behavior. And I'll give you some examples. Convenience samples, for example, are rife with fraud. I estimate probably 20% of convenience panels are being powered by bots or people in foreign countries, and despite everyone's best efforts at ad fraud detection, at survey fraud detection, I'd be skeptical if anyone said their sample is 100% clean. Just as one example, any of you can go download this bot amongst of many called Cody, and you can put this on your computer, and Cody will go pull off surveys off of various survey exchanges. You can complete your survey. It will then farm out your answers to a whole pile of other machines, varying the answers slightly, and we'll collect the data. And you get paid a little bit for everyone's surveys getting completed. They get paid a little bit, and on it goes. Beautiful system, clearly designed by someone who understands research, and highly destructive, because this sort of stuff creates sort of problems in data where you don't have total faith. How can you have faith in data if you don't know exactly who's completing the survey? How do you have trust if you don't know exactly who's providing the data? Similarly, what's the problem with ad fraud? Same thing, right? We have bot traffic and domain spoofing and pixel stuffing, all this stuff. Altogether, just these two sets of problems, that's at least, and these are conservative estimates, 10, 12, $15 billion in fraud. Just alone, just solving those problems alone is clearly a massive target for entrepreneurs. That's like a $10 billion market. It's a good sized problem to solve. And at the same time, obviously, we have another attack coming in when we have consumers themselves losing trust in people working with their data. This is a fascinating site. If you all want to be scared, go check out the site, World's Biggest Data Breaches, and go through this. It's alarming on how much of our collective data has been hacked, stolen, leaked, whatever. Essentially, my working assumption is now that all of our data is out everywhere. I've already put I have little kids, 6, 8, and 11. I put them on credit freezes in looking at this stuff because I just can't have faith that our data is not being thrown around wherever. And it's these sorts of things. If you think about how do we eliminate fraud, how do we ourselves have confidence in our data being used in the ways that we want it to be used, it's the heart of where I think there's a lot of opportunity. Now, fortunately, in some ways, the European Union is taking a lead. And for those of you that aren't familiar with GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation is going to affect. It is not just about consumer data, it's all data. But at the heart of it, it's creating a framework that holds companies to be responsible for helping consumers have a line of sight to their data and control over their data. There's some relatively significant fines that can be associated with this. This starts to create a framework, but I think what's interesting is, in a way, this is a boon for anyone who's interested in the world of blockchain, because ultimately, the blockchain is a tool to enable GDPR compliance. If you can help put data on a blockchain, help have people have control of it, you are, in fact, almost instantly GDPR compliant. And so where does this really help us? Where are the areas of opportunity for blockchain? I think if you take all we just talked about, I think there's at least 5 areas, and there's probably a longer list other people have, but these are the things that I see. I said, first and foremost, I think the heart of blockchain can help to solve some key problems here. Number one, I think it can definitely help protect data rights. If you're able to put data onto a blockchain and track how that data is used and be able to give clear permissions, that starts to solve a big problem around data fraud. In order for AI to work, we need that. We also need to be able to ensure we have an audit trail for data from its point of origin to its point of use on each and every data element. Otherwise, the possibility that your data gets hacked, gets misused, or someone's spoofing, if you can't see that, who knows what you're getting out of your machine, out of your AI system? You don't know. And I think that also blockchain has a great possibility just to make it fair for people to be able to share their data. I myself feel I've been involved in creating businesses around monetizing consumer data, and I feel personally very motivated in how do we make the system more fair for all of us, because we give away our data. How do we do it? I think blockchain, the kinds of businesses people are starting up are going to make that much more possible. And therefore also make it just a fair exchange of value between those people who are creating and those people who are using it. And at the heart of this too is just examples like Filecoin, and that it really is about collapsing some of these silos. And I think from a point of view of industries we're in, even take places like GFK, other research companies, you have to think differently, because ultimately the blockchain starts to allow a lot of power to go back to individuals. And so if you're creating silos, if you're creating businesses based on black boxes, I think blockchain ultimately comes to really have the opportunity to directly challenge that. Because when you build an ecosystem that's built on trust and transparency at the core of it, it makes you think differently about how you yourselves are going to create value in your business. And let me just give you an example. This is just a little slice of the ecosystem that's starting to pop up of new kinds of businesses that are applying blockchain in our collective space. And just to give you some different ideas, I've sort of clustered these around. You have companies, for example, Props and Algebraics are a couple of examples of companies that are creating an ecosystem to pay consumers for creating content and to pay consumers for consuming content. It's how do you create a different kind of ecosystem to make it more fair for both sides of the equation? There's a whole growth of the area of prediction markets. So companies like Augur were one of the early players in this, but the idea of how do you create an ecosystem where people can, you could use it for betting, but it can be used for other applications as well. If people can predict accurately what's going to happen in the marketplace, why not help them reward other players in the marketplace for being accurate? Change is early players starting off in the ad tech space. You've got people here who are working on user authentication. Is someone really who they say they are? Do they have the credentials they say they are? Can I verify their address, their identities? Key piece of it all. And then you've got a group of guys over here, for example, Data Wallet, Streamer, Opinion Economy, and others. They're looking at how do I help consumers better monetize their data? How do I help them control it and find lots of avenues to efficiently maximize their value? So again, lots of different players, and I would encourage you all to start to look at these and others. The ecosystem is just getting going, and with all that capital washing in, it's really a Cambrian era in this space. Who knows which models will work? There I will not take, I won't try to place any bets, because we're far too early, far too early. But at the same time, massive players are coming in. The banks are in, IBM and Ernst & Young are coming in. There's a lot of players coming in. The biggest single constraint is skill. Currently, for every blockchain task needed, for every skilled blockchain developer, there are at least 14 jobs for that person right now. So there's a massive gap in skills versus demand. That itself is, I'm sure that'll get fixed, but there's a big gap there now. So just to summarize, 10 reasons why I think blockchain matters to our business. I think it definitely, at the heart of this, is going to help us deal with our data issues. I think the fact that we're now in blockchain 3.0 means that this technology, which is an infrastructure technology, is going to start to be able to impact our businesses a lot faster in a lot more ways. If you're thinking about applying AI in your business, you have to master your data, the data history, the data veracity, and blockchain, I think, is a really powerful way to do that. If you need to tap funding, there's no better way. There's no better way than an ICO, and that the fact that so much capital is coming in will impact your business. There are new companies coming in, will have all the resources, as long as they don't squander their money to deploy. And the marketplace is going to keep growing exponentially. We're at the very earliest part of this adoption curve. We are so early still. So it's great you're all here and thinking about this, because as late as you may feel you are coming to the party, it's still so hyper early. It's really crazy. This is definitely going to challenge the siloed business model. So any silo you're thinking of, any black box, be careful, think about how this is going to undermine it, because it will. Blockchain does help power GDPR. And again, GDPR is just the first step in a longer process, I think, about how the world wants to deal with helping regulate how our data gets used and not abused. And it's definitely not just for startups, as I think we talked about. The blockchain is really touching from the very largest companies down. And really, none of us should be thinking this isn't for us, because this is definitely a protocol that trust, just think how fundamental trust is to everything we do. And it's really at the heart of that, which blockchain is building. So with that, I'll open up to any questions.
Thank you all very much. We have time for questions. Let's start with Joe.
Hi, Rolfe. Joe Mandisi from
Joe.
Media Post. You're pretty keen on the ICO method of capitalization, I gather. But I was struck by the anecdote you showed on the subprime crisis, and where that disparity occurred was through the unsecuritized debt. 100% of those $6.3 billion raised in those ICOs are unsecuritized. Why is that something people should trust?
Yeah, so I think I would reframe about me being positive. I think the model of the ICO is a radical model in how it is a useful tool to jumpstart the fast growth of an ecosystem and provide new kinds of capital. There is a separate question, which is how should anyone figure out whether or not an ICO is a good thing to invest in or not, be part of, is a totally different question. And I think that is something where everyone has to be very careful, because as any case, when there's money pouring into a market, the chance for abuse is there, and it's clear there's already been cases of that. And so the model is not without peril. And it is an unfortunate thing if people abuse it, because my own personal take is I think it is a powerful engine for creation. You can help free up capital from constraints and help direct it towards creative enterprise. That's a good thing to do. The power of creative destruction is a good thing to foster. But I think at the same time, the world is coming into how to regulate these things, how to take control. The one thing I would just remember, I've been helping advise a couple of companies, and when it comes to doing an ICO, the number one thing is to be very clear from an investor about what you're putting money in, but even as the company who's issuing an ICO, if you misstate what you're doing in your white paper or whatever, you're committing fraud. And now, even more dangerously, if you're selling your securities to someone in China, the penalty for fraud is rather severe. Does anyone know what the penalty for securities fraud is in China? Death. So personally, that makes a very strong incentive to be very honest and make sure no one in China is buying your ICO, right? But this is extremely serious. And unfortunately, some companies have got ahead of themselves, and even with the very best intentions, wrote very thoughtful white papers and raised a pile of capital, and then they started building. And then they realized, uh-oh, we can't actually build the technology in the way that we thought. And best intentions in the world aside, they're guilty of securities fraud, and they're in a process of how do I deal with remediation. And that's a painful place to be. So I'm an entrepreneur at heart. I love to be very bullish and optimistic, but on this stuff, you have to be careful, because no matter what you want to pretend, generally, if it looks and smells like a security that you're selling a security. And the SEC is taking that view. So So I think two different things. As a engine for capital raise and deployment, fantastic. As a opportunity for fraud, it exists, be careful, and there's definitely gonna be more and more regulation around them to keep them people from being harmed. Sorry.
Good morning, Rolfe. Dan Kidd with Data Wallet. How do you view the economics behind the blockchain model and something tracking as simple as a head of lettuce, and what the computational costs and friction from a cost standpoint, or a display ad?
Right. Yeah, so I think that's a really good question. There's a lot of people talk about the cost of running stuff in the blockchain. Like, for example, when you could run an initial transaction using Bitcoin, it took seconds and it cost pennies. Now, if you run a transaction on blockchain, on a Bitcoin transaction, it can take a couple days to settle, and it can cost you $20, $30. So the cost is very high. Ethereum is less, but still the price of gas has been going up. I believe fundamentally we are in a very, very early stage of this technology development. Every time I go and talk to developers, all the problems I see, there are so many people working on solving these problems, and really smart people who are really focused on it because there's some really big prizes, that I just believe fundamentally those problems will keep going away. That if you look at the trend of technology, the costs of doing stuff keep diminishing towards zero, and this will be the same. So the question is when, but that's where you have to be patient and understand that. So I think part of this is knowing that nothing is gonna happen just overnight. I don't know the economics. It's a great question. We should actually, I wish the IBM and Walmart people were here to talk about the economics of that, but I'd be very interested to actually understand, and I don't know the answer to that. It's a great question.
Hi, Rolfe. Really great presentation. I have to say I've seen a lot of these, and you've actually explained things really well, so congratulations. However, my name's Mary Keane-Dawson, and I'm the founder of Truth Media, and we've actually ran a programmatic media campaign verified by blockchain technology, and we've built a platform, and we don't have a token. So I think that it's quite important to qualify that blockchain and ICOs are, although connected, okay, they are not you do not have to have an ICO or a cryptocurrency to have a very effective verification tool.
Yeah, yeah, it's a perfect point of clarification. Yeah, the token is just a mechanism that can run a blockchain and by which to facilitate the transmission of a credit. So yes, you're absolutely right. It is not, just to be clear, it is not a key part at all, no.
And Rolfe, let me second Mary's vote. That was excellent. Thank you very much
Great.
for opening us on a
Thank
good
you all.
note.